Hello and most welcome to Heidegger 1740. We will today continue the article The Language Game of Revelation by Locker and Sedmak. We left off in 1738, the page 248. And we gone through earlier here how grammar, logic rules understanding and language. These are descriptive way of understanding, quite separate from explanatory, descriptive. That is because language games are connected with our way of living, with the form of life. Sedmak and Andreas Blank calls that culture. No, sorry, Locker's. Sedmak and Locker call that culture. It's the deeply interconnectedness, how we live our language, what we mean, and so forth. There are no barren or shut windows here, or doors, or walls. It is the interconnectedness that makes for a possibility of any understanding whatsoever. It's deeply ingrained in our doings. Our human acts are not distinct or something we can discriminate from the words like Saussure, Lévi-Strauss, Austen, Quine, and so forth. No, they are deeply ingrained, and of course this makes understandings coming from quantum mechanics seem much less weird, like entanglement. Wittgenstein would say entanglement is a prerequisite for something to be, for something to exist, and also to be pointed at. Sorry, my cough attack. Grammatical investigations, and I continue here where we left off. Grammatical investigations are challenging since they require the ability to look at the implicit rules and make them explicit. It is only in normal cases that the use of a word is clearly prescribed. We know we are in no doubt what to say in this or that case. The more abnormal the case, the more doubtful it becomes what we are to say. And if things were quite different from what they actually are, if there were, for instance, no characteristic expression of pain, of fear, of joy, if rule became exception and exception rule, or if both became phenomena of roughly equal frequency, this would make our normal language games lose their point. The procedure of putting a lump of cheese on balance and fixing the price by turn of the scale would lose its point if it frequently happened for such lumps to suddenly grow or shrink for no obvious reason. Grammatical investigations are always investigations into the human condition and into a particular culture. The way we live and the way we speak are inextricably linked. The way we use words reveals a lot about the foundations of our culture. Misconstruction of sentences or an abuse of words points to, as Wittgenstein once said, cultural sickness. Language games are embedded in a form of life. Because of that, the analysis of language games is part of cultural analysis. And since the implicit rules of language games are embedded in a form of life, They reflect the basic convictions of our forms of life. A form of life is the way to live, as well as the way and manner in which life generally is mastered. Language is embedded in a primary form of life that allows an agreement in definition and judgments. This is not an agreement in opinions, but in form of life. Wittgenstein interprets this fundamental form of life as worldview. A worldview, Weltanschauung, is composed of a set of basic convictions. According to Ludwig Wittgenstein in his Uncertainty, a worldview is part of a kind of mythology. That we did not get by satisfying ourselves of its correctness. It is, he says, the inherited background against which I distinguish between true and false. That is why we accept that we find what we find written in a textbook, not because it offers us evidence, but the fact that we accept certain beliefs on the basis of a picture of the world as the substratum of all my inquiring and asserting. The propositions describing the world picture are not equally subject to testing. They are beyond reasonable doubt, as we have seen in our epistemological considerations. Doubting the propositions describing the world picture would mean playing an empty game of doubt. The testing comes to an end, passing on a worldview happens through a kind of persuasion. The acquisition of new knowledge in the sciences cannot be understood without reference to a world picture. Wittgenstein gives an example taken from the field of chemistry. Think of chemical investigations. Lavoisier makes experiments with substances in his laboratory, and now he concludes that this and that takes place where there is burning. He does not say that it might happen otherwise another time. He has got hold of a definite world picture. Not, of course, one that he invented. He learned it as a child. I say world picture and not hypothesis, because it is the matter of course foundation for his research, and as such also goes unmentioned. We can leave 5 lines before you go up to the black. Like in mythology, our worldview is a system of convictions which can easily be changed, and which cannot easily be changed, and which is connected with our praxis. And go the whole way up. So every 5 lines you can go up, up. So our worldview is under the dark. Our worldview does neither rest on empirical knowledge, nor does it depend on the verification of hypotheses. Even contradicting experiences do not at once shatter our worldview. A change, however, to another worldview has the character of a conversion. In this sense, Wittgenstein's concept of language games can well be integrated into a theory of culture and even into an analysis of the deepest layers of the very foundations of culture. That is why it seems to be fruitful to use Wittgenstein's language game model for a better understanding of some aspects of religion as well. The language game of the Book of Revelation. Revelation as language game. The question of what is the Book of Revelation is generally answered by explaining that its literary form is similar to that of the Book of Daniel and other apocalyptic writings. This way of classifying Revelation automatically places the book into a specific context of interpretation. For example, if Revelation is assigned to the genre of apocalypse that is defined through the book of Daniel, then eo ipso, it is assumed that Revelation and Daniel are similar in meaning. If therefore the phrase exegesis in Dan 20:28 describes God's revelation of what will happen at the end of days, then exegesis in Revelation 1:1, 4:1 and 22:6 must assert the same. Likewise, if Dan 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 8, 5, 2 emphasizes God's action independent from human collaboration, then the Christian addressees of Revelation are also called to passively await the martyrdom and God's change of history. Revelation 13:10. Indeed, a future eschatological interpretation of Revelation 1:1 will set the tone for the interpretation of the rest of the book. Recently, however, scholars have questioned some of the presupposition of the said interpretation. Especially by judging that the situation for Christians during the time of the writing of Revelation was considerably different from the Jewish suffering during Antiochus' occupation of Palestine. There simply was no massive persecution of Christians in Asia Minor during the reign of Domitian. Consequently, accepting martyrdom should not have been John's principal message. In spite of the death of Antipas, Revelation 12:13, the crisis during the time of Revelation was certainly not imminent death for all Christians. An equally improbable hypothesis assumes that Ave Genesis in Revelation 1:1 and 22:6 points to some future persecution that in the mind of John will in the near future befall the Christian church in the Roman Empire. Two additional observations explicate the above-mentioned problematic. The first is indeed Revelation's unparalleled literary form. In fact, assigning any established literary genre to Revelation meets the difficulty that John's revelation does completely corresponds to any one existing genre. Second, any Bible theological interpretation of Revelation is overwhelmed by John's abundant use of the Old Testament However, the seer's more than 500 references to the Old Testament are never quotations, but always allusions. Two significant examples for John's change of the Old Testament are 1 Daniel 2:28, Ave Yenesfa Epschaton ton Imeron is changed into Revelation 1:1. Ave Yenesfa Entashe. In Isaiah 43:19. Idu Toyo Kana into Revelation 2:15. Idu Kaina Toyo Panda. This allows for the assumption that while the Old Testament is the interpretive basis for John, Revelation is a new language game. In the thought of Wittgenstein, it is a philosophizing that is misled by language itself that underlies these above-mentioned difficulties. This happens whenever one proposes that language must always function in the same way. Against this essentialism, Wittgenstein proposes to bring words back from the metaphysical to the everyday use. Joining in this task, this paper will not attempt to ask what is revelation, but how to use revelation. That's an excellent stopper there. It's an excellent proposal from Sedmak. To make revelation real, to make it as not something static coming from philosophy, but as it was meant from the beginning, working and functioning in language. We go for some quotes. We do take a note of where we stopped, very important. Number, date, and time, I would recommend. It's also the day of Mary today, God's mother. At the very end of page 248, language is embedded in a primary form of life that allows an agreement in definition and judgments. And listen now, this is not an agreement in opinions, but in a form of life. Agreement in opinions is nothing at all. We know that from cognition, we know that from AI, but in the form of life, we can unite. We previously went through a whole number of articles about the revelation, all very interesting, but they were incredibly different. They did not share anything. They all had most subjective takes of revelation, sort of extremely private, new inventions. Wittgenstein shows us how something can be shared and how we can sort of reach into what something really is. And that's the form of life, taking all into consideration. And that's further explained in the sentences that comes. Wittgenstein, going to the next page, interprets this fundamental form of life as worldview. A worldview is composed on a basic set of convictions. On certainty, further down, we see many interesting quotes from O.C. A worldview is part of a kind of mythology that we did not get by satisfying ourselves of its correctness. I think this last is excellent, because that shows why we have this manic strive for an original. I myself been wondering that in linguistics, and I realize now it's because they cannot find the truth, so they desperately try to dig for it where it cannot be found, making up rules privately as they go along. Wittgenstein is showing that the truth is all the connections. So the digging for the original actually blocks communality and sharedness. And further down, that is why we accept what we find written in a textbook. Not, listen now, not because it offers us evidence, but because of the fact that we accept certain beliefs on the basis of a picture of the world as the substratum of all my inquiry and asserting The propositions describing the world picture are not equally subject to testing. They are beyond reasonable doubt, as we have seen in our epistemological considerations. And here comes the important: doubting the propositions of the world picture would mean playing an empty game of doubt. This doubting the propositions describing the world picture would mean playing an empty game of doubt. The testing comes to an end. So what Wittgenstein is pointing to is, if we question our place in the language game, we will not reach any more certainty. It is just the opposite. We will reach doubt, and we will not further understanding. Kalle, can you hear me?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I need to stop here. I have a visit by the police.
Oi.
But you need to go as well. So we continue tonight.
Yes, after 7 p.m. perhaps.
Okay.
Goodbye.
Sounds
Goodbye,
very
goodbye.
good. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone for listening, and have a good day, good afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Bye-bye for now.